Axios, 5th of August 2023, 44-year-old science agreement's future is hampered by U.S. China hostilities. At the end of August, a 44-year-old agreement that provided a framework for the United States and China to collaborate on scientific research is scheduled to expire, calling into doubt a long-standing tenet of the two nations' ties. Why it's essential: it will send a message to Beijing if the pact, which was the first one inked when relations between the United States and China were normalized in the late 1970s, is extended, revised, or allowed to expire. Politicians and professionals are currently arguing what the message should be. The U.S. China Science and Technology Agreement, SDA, first signed in 1979 and extended most recently in 2018, provided a platform for scientific cooperation in various fields, including physics, chemistry, and health. China could migrate away from ozone-depleting CFCs thanks to international cooperation, which allowed the sharing of influenza data to develop new vaccinations. Over 40 years into the agreement, which has survived a pandemic and several administrations of vehement rhetoric, its broader scope is being scrutinized due to worries about Beijing-supported intellectual property theft and the Chinese military gaining access to information about American scientific advancements. The STA should be renewed in some form because, in their view, collaboration is more advantageous than conflict. According to detractors, continuing the pact sends Beijing the message that Washington isn't seriously concerned about the risks. Details: according to John Holdren, a former head of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, under the Obama administration, the signing of the SDA provided a form of permission for lab-to-lab, university-to-university, and scientist-to-scientist cooperation. It validated the idea that cooperation was a worthy endeavor. He claims that increased cooperation has facilitated the development of close bonds between American and Chinese scientists, many of whom went on to hold prominent positions in Beijing and Washington and used those connections to address scientific challenges of shared concern. When the U.S. Justice Department established the China Initiative to look into potential Chinese intellectual property theft and espionage during the Trump administration, scientific cooperation between the U.S. and China came under heavy scrutiny. After charges that officials had racially profiled scientists, the initiative was terminated. The STA is not legally binding. It has facilitated data sharing about satellites, climate and seismic activity, and fusion and subatomic particle studies, with agreements between federal research bodies and their Chinese counterparts. Federal U.S. agencies organized research programs, initiatives, centers, symposia, and exchanges in chemistry, physics, climate and energy science, agriculture, health, and others. A lot of symbolism is there in the agreement, which acknowledges that cooperation might strengthen friendly relations and promote the well-being and prosperity of both countries. China's technological and scientific advancements in 1979 were far behind those of the United States. It was unimaginable to think of where China was in terms of science and technology then versus where they are now, says Scott Michael Moore, Director of China Programs and Strategic Initiatives at the University of Pennsylvania. IP concerns weren't on the radar, and no rivalry was considered. However, China's dominance in the fields of artificial intelligence, AI, quantum sciences, biomedicine, and space exploration, as well as both nations' capacity to transform fundamental sciences into cutting-edge, dual-use technologies with both military and enormous commercial value, have placed scientific cooperation between the two countries in the crosshairs of both domestic and international politics. According to Moore, the SDA wasn't intended to occupy that area. According to Holdren and others, the deal should be renewed because it provides a window into China's capabilities and advancements, which the U.S. may use to its advantage. Kim Montgomery, Director of International Affairs and Science Diplomacy at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, argues that maintaining international science collaboration between the U.S. and China when appropriate and possible is more important because the scientific enterprise is different than it was in 1979. What they're saying. In a June letter to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the House Select Committee on China stated that it would strongly recommend that the United States not extend the SDA due to worries that research funded by the SDA could bolster China's military-industrial complex. According to committee chairman Mike Gallagher, Republican Wisconsin, extending the science and technology agreement between the U.S. and China will only put our research and intellectual property at even greater risk. Holdren acknowledges that the United States must communicate our concern regarding intellectual property theft, defense information theft, and human rights issues. Still, he believes it is more effective to argue about those problems with people on the other side than to cut off relations. Montgomery, there are legitimate concerns about national security, intellectual property, and competitiveness, to name a few, but those call for modifications to the agreement and not walking away. A spokesman for the State Department stated that the agency does not offer comments on internal or external talks. An inquiry for comment from OSTP was not answered. The opposing side. At last month's Aspen Security Summit, Chinese ambassador to the United States Xie Feng stated that the agreement's renewal is a top priority for bilateral cooperation. According to a statement from the Chinese embassy in Washington, China is prepared to discuss the terms and structure of the agreement with the United States based on equality and mutual benefit. Between the lines, the Biden administration has sent several senior American officials to China since June to diffuse tensions between Washington and Beijing. Failure to renew the contract might make those efforts more difficult.